business owners and entrepreneurs often look for ways to share their success with others. And one common way is through donor-advised funds. Today, I'm here with Kelly Webster, who is a senior program officer and legal counsel at the Richard M. Schulze Family Foundation. Prior to joining the foundation, Kelly worked with many family business owners and entrepreneurs on establishing and managing donor-advised funds. Thank you for being here today, Kelly.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, what is a donor-advised fund?
What it is for a donor is a lot like a charitable checkbook. That's what people call it. So it's a place that a donor can make a contribution. It can be cash, it can be securities, it can be lots of other kinds of complex assets, real estate. It goes into the fund, and then at their discretion, the donor, who's typically the advisor, can designate grantees. Families can invest in that donor advised fund, and often do, and see it grow over time. Lots of donor advised funds essentially create sort of a charitable nest egg. And then grants can go out of that at the donor's discretion.
Now, we also often will hear about foundations. So, for example, right now you work at, the Richard M. Schulze Family Foundation. So what are the key differences between the two, a family foundation and one of these donor advised funds?
Things to look at are really size and administrative cost, and also how much time you as the family business owner have to dedicate to running that foundation. Donor advised funds are kind of an easy button. You've got the sponsor that does all the back end administration for you. They do the paperwork, they do the investing, they do all the grant oversight. So they really do the bulk of the work, and primarily the advisor just enjoys the experience of giving from that fund. With a private foundation, there's a lot more that goes into it. Oftentimes there's professional staff to handle a lot of that. The question of which is which, I think, really comes down to, do they hope this is going to span multiple generations for a family? A foundation might be a better fit. Or is it something you're looking just kind of with your immediate family to engage in philanthropy and generate those philanthropic values in perhaps your kids or even grandkids? A DAF can accomplish a lot of that for you.
So why should a family business owner or entrepreneur consider investing in one?
Most DAF sponsors or administrators are going to offer you online ways to go in and make your grants and also check your fund balance. They also offer a way for donors to right now start to make plans for intergenerational philanthropy, if that's a value of theirs, or their own trajectory of charitable giving into things like their retirement and even more legacy type giving they might want to do over the course of their lifetime.
Is there a minimum amount that you need to invest or something like this? Is this only for the super wealthy?
One of the great benefits of donor advised funds is increasingly they are accessible to donors at almost every level. So many community foundations may have a minimum investment amount, but then most won't have sort of a fund balance minimum that you need to keep in there. But you do not need to be super wealthy, and you don't need to be at the point of your life where you're doing your most significant giving yet. It's a way to start to practice and flex those philanthropic muscles.
And are there tax benefits?
There are lots of great tax benefits with donor advised funds. When you make a contribution to a donor advised fund, it receives the same tax treatment as giving to a public charity. Your tax advisors can give you all the nuts and bolts of what that deductibility looks like. But the biggest tax advantage that donor advised fund donors really love is they get the tax deduction at the time they put the money into the fund. Perhaps your viewers are thinking about or considering is what we used to call the liquidity event. So at various times in a family business life cycle, that business might be bought out, or parts of it might be bought out, or maybe it splits. That becomes a beautiful time for them to think about the deduction in that year and put it in a donor advised fund. So I worked with a lot of donor advised funds advisors who, because of what was happening with their family business, had some real tax planning considerations. It allowed them to set up this donor advised fund now in the year that they needed to think about those tax consequences, but then make plans over the long term. Questions like, what does it mean for us to think through our values as a family and manifest that in the kind of grant making we do. And the fund creates this platform for the families to have those conversations, to engage in that philanthropy together, and oftentimes name their adult children as what's called successor advisors. And that meant that upon their passing, their kids inherited this oftentimes quite significant charitable portfolio that they could then make grants from at their discretion.
Are there any limits? You mentioned there might be some limits in how they can use the grants.
Most of the time, people use their donor advised funds to make grants to public charities, and there are typically very few limits in that space. Depending upon your administrator, some other kinds of grants, for instance, a grant to an individual. We have a lot of GoFundMe out there right now, right? Usually can't use your donor advised fund for that kind of support. Grants internationally, so to a foreign organization, are often accomplished, but there are usually some extra fees and some extra administrative issues. The final thing I'll note are scholarship grants. Sometimes folks like to see their donor advised fund be used to help offset the tuition of, say, a grandchild or a niece or a nephew. That's usually not going to be possible.
Any final words of advice?
A donor advised fund is a really tremendous place to just get started. And then, sky's the limit from there.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Again, this is Kelly Webster, who's a Senior Program Officer with the Richard M. Schulze Foundation. And I'm Kim Eddleston with Entrepreneur Innovation Exchange and FamilyBusiness.org. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for having me.